Hey, how's it going? In this video I'm going to go into the background of the Battlefield 1 map Monte Grappa. I wanted to do some research and find out more about this map because it's one of my favorite maps in the game, and in doing so I found out the interesting history behind this battle. The desperate situation for Italy, the hell that is combat amongst mountains, artillery, gas, and flamethrowers, and how the real map how the real battle differentiates from the Battlefield 1 map. I will start with very general information about the background history of the conflict, and then get more specific without hopefully skipping over any important facts that are needed to understand the full situation. Alright, so let's get into the history. So, for the background history, originally the Kingdom of Italy sided with the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Germany before the outbreak of war in 1914, and Italy remained neutral as long as it had a long-standing rivalry and territorial disputes with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the terms of the alliance were a little complicated, but in general the alliance was defensive in nature. Both the Triple Alliance and now called the Central Powers and the Allied Powers offered Italy territorial concessions at the end of the war. However, many groups within the Italian elite and radical groups such as the nationalists and communists in Italy, they wanted war against Austria-Hungary. These groups wanted the taking of South Tyrol in northern Italy, or southern Austria, and this region was it was ethnically diverse, but the majority of the population were Italians. The figures go about 40%. So because the population was majority Italian, these groups wanted all Italian-speaking regions basically to be under the Kingdom of Italy. So Austria-Hungary at the time, in 1915, when Italy did eventually join the war, they were struggling with pressure from the Russian Empire, and the Italians saw this as an opportunity to retake the land of southern, or not retake, but to take the land of South Tyrol. And in the Treaty of London, Italy formally exited the Triple Alliance and joined the Allied Powers, and on the 23rd of May 1915, Italy joined the war against the Central Powers. Fast forward to 1917, the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians had fought 11 battles on the Isonzo River since Italy joining the war in 1915. This river runs through modern-day Slovenia, and in the north, modern-day Italy in the south. Along this front, the Italian military under command of Luigi Cadorna repeatedly assaulted Austrian positions along the river and mountains to the north. Cadorna believed that since the Austro-Hungarian Empire had already fortified the Alpine borders to the north shortly before the war, that the only feasible front against Austria-Hungary would be along the Isonzo River. But unfortunately for Italian soldiers, Cadorna was an advocate for frontal assaults, and he was generally very harsh in his command of soldiers. So, and in addition to this, the Austro-Hungarian field marshal was exceptionally skilled in defensive warfare. So along the Isonzo front, for both the Italians and the Hungarians, there was massive fighting and massive losses. In total, the Isonzo front cost the lives of over 500,000 men, 300,000 Italian, and 200,000 Austro-Hungarians, and many of those were Slovenians. The 12th Battle of the Isonzo River was the battle that broke the back of the Italian military. Due to the capitulation of Russia in 1917, the Germans and Austro-Hungarians were able to transfer divisions to the western and Italian fronts, and on the 24th of October, the Austro-Hungarian and German empires combined launched a successful attack against the Italian Second Army using small unit tactics. called stormtroops, and gas attacks on Italian positions, and the Italians who had ineffective gas masks at the time, with a combination of flamethrowers and grenades. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians advanced under mist near Caporetto at a part of the Italian line which was relatively lightly defended. The center of the Italian line broke. The flanks held, but the center breakthrough forced the Italians on each flank to fall back. And due to some stubbornness on the part of Cadorna, believing that the line could be held, he did not authorize the Italian army to retreat for 6 days. And finally, on the 30th of October, the Italians began their retreat towards the Tagliamento River. Due to supply limits, the Austro-Hungarian and German forces were not able to effectively pursue the Italian army past the Piave River. The Italian military set up natural defenses at the Piave River, and this was 20 miles north of Venice. And then defeated the German and Austro-Hungarian attempts to establish bridgeheads across the river. The Italian Second Army practically ceased to exist after this battle, and approximately 265,000 Italian prisoners were taken by both Austria-Hungary and Germany. This is where the Battle of Monte Grappa became, or not the battle, but the mountain of Monte Grappa became very important, as the Piave River defensive line that the Italians had just set up could be outflanked by the mountain of Monte Grappa, and the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans felt if they could break through this line that they could take Venice and Verona and force Italy to sign an armistice. I actually may go further into the events of Caporetto in a future video, but there's a lot of history behind the battles of the Isonzo River. So moving on, I'll move on to the first battle of Monte Grappa now. There were 3 battles on Monte Grappa after the Italian defeated Caporetto. There was a battle in 1917 in November and December, a battle in June of 1918, and the final battle which is the one in Battlefield 1, on the 24th of October 1918, a month before the end of the war. The Italians at the Piave River as I said earlier, managed to beat back the Germans that had crossed the river, and then the Italians promptly flooded the river. To the east, the Austro-Hungarian forces attempted to break through near Asiago, which is a plateau plain, which is located to the immediate east of Monte Grappa. This entire area was located behind the Piave River. However, the attack was very costly, and they didn't gain much land. Before the onset of winter, the Austro-Hungarians wanted to break through the Piave River line, because if it had become a stalemate again, Austria-Hungary knew it did not have the resources to continue to sustain itself in the war, and it would capitulate sooner rather than later. So this is where the mountain or the mountain chain of Monte Grappa came into Austro-Hungarian plans. Monte Grappa was still located to the west of the Piave River, and if captured, the Austro-Hungarians could completely outflank the entire defensive line on the Piave River. So the first battle of Monte Grappa began shortly after the Italians set up their defenses on the mountain and the surrounding ridges, and despite Cadorna's earlier failure to prevent a breakthrough and the near complete destruction of the Italian Second Army, 3 other Italian armies had successfully retreated across the Piave River and set up their defensive lines to hold back the Austro-Hungarian offensive. The remnants of the Italian Fourth Army fell back to the west of the river and began setting up defenses on Monte Grappa. Monte Grappa itself is a small massif with multiple ridges and peaks, with the tallest point in the massif labeled Monte Grappa. Due to a fortress carved in the rocks on the summit of Monte Grappa before the attack by the German and Austro-Hungarian militaries they were reserved to attacking, only the west and eastern flanks of the mountains, as they did not possess any weapons capable of destroying the well-designed and quickly built fort, and a frontal assault on the position would be just short of suicide. The Austrians and the Germans had over 2,000 artillery pieces to take the massive, with shells being exceptionally deadly due to the splintering of alpine rock. On the east side of Monte Grappa, the Austrian army took the peak of Monte Tumba, which is the point that is closest to the Piave River, and soldiers reportedly from the Austro-Hungarian Empire could see all the way to the city of Venice, and morale in the Austrian army increased despite not yet having control of the actual mountain of Monte Grappa. Multiple Italian positions on separate peaks of the Monte Grappa massif fell due to massed artillery and assaults, yet the Italian army didn't collapse like Caporetto a month earlier. The Italian soldiers knew that the stakes were too high and that the survival of Italy hinged on their defense of the mountain. Monte Pertica, which is the ridge immediately to the north of the Monte Grappa main mountain, changed hands 7 times in one day, and winter conditions began to set in on the mountain, and this reduced the visibility further, leading to close quarters fighting. However, heavy snow had yet to set in, but winter conditions were practically there. On the 14th of December, the Germans began their massive assault on Monte Grappa proper. Despite having the mountain flanked on 2 sides, the weather and losses began to mount for the Austrians as they lost key positions on the east and west of Monte Grappa, and by the 23rd of December 1917, heavy snow had set in and the combat became exceptionally more difficult. And by the 30th, the Austrians had fell back to the north of contested ridges on Monte Grappa, as the Italians retook ridges on both flanks, with a French Alpine regiment taking Monte Tumba on the east flank of Monte Grappa. Both sides then settled in for the winter, and each side raced to create more and more defensive fortifications. By the spring of 1918, once again the Austro-Hungarian Empire had occupied the critical ridges to the east and west of the mountain, and additionally the highly contested Monte Pertica to the north of the Monte Grappa summit was also taken by the Austro-Hungarians, and this extremely critical position that Italy was in was described by Konrad von Hotzendorf, the Austro-Hungarian chief of staff, as that of a shipwrecked survivor holding onto a piece of wood. You only need to cut off his fingers to see him drown. In the summer of 1918, the Austro-Hungarians sought to finally deal Italy its death blow. However, much of the German support from the previous battle at Caporetto was no longer present, as the troops were needed for the German spring offensive in France. The Austrians launched an attack to the east of Asiago once again against the British and French divisions, capturing much of the Asiago plateau and threatening again to outflank the entire Italian army. Despite some success, the Austrians were unable to push past the plateau's rim and were halted with heavy losses. At the same time, the west flank of Monte Grappa fell once again, with Austrian troops armed with gas grenades and flamethrowers. They managed to recapture the summit of Monte Asalone, which is on the west side of Monte Grappa, and they did this under the cover of fog and rain, and they even pushed down that ridge into the tiny village of San Lorenzo, and the Austrian advance was halted on the southern slopes of Monte Grappa by Italy's new counter to German and Austro-Hungarian shock troops, the Arditi. The Arditi routed the Austrians attacking from San Lorenzo with extreme ferocity, as the Arditi were trained not only to fight with new advanced weaponry such as the double-barreled Villar Perosa machine gun and flamethrowers, but also the men of the Arditi were trained in close quarters combat and they were generally not afraid of close quarters combat and were often encouraged to do so. And when they did so, it was extremely brutal. To the southwest of Monte Grappa along the Piave River, the Italians held the Austrians back. The Austrians lost thousands of troops due to summer rains in the mountains, which caused the Piave River to flood. And in compensation with the flooding of the river, an air raid destroyed one of the Austrian pontoon bridges and destroyed the Austrians' link to retreat across the river if need be, or receive supplies from across the river. This stranded many Austrian soldiers across the river and led to basically a massive defeat for the Austrians. The Austrians had suffered 180,000 killed or wounded or missing, and 35,000 of those being on the mountain of Monte Grappa. The Italians suffered less, but still significant casualties, with 85,000 and 14,000 on the top of Monte Grappa. The internal divisions in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and mass food shortages in both Germany and Austria-Hungary, and the failure of both in their spring and summer offensive respectively, meant that the Central Powers were now generally forced on the defensive, and they would not attack much, if at all, for the rest of the war. And finally, we get to 1918 and the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. This is the first large Italian offensive since the 11th battle on the Isonzo River back in 1917. After Caporetto Cadorna was replaced by Armando Diaz, who successfully held back all of the German and Austrian attempts to break through the Monte Grappa and Piave River. On October 24th, 1 year to the day after the disaster at Caporetto, Diaz launched the offensive that would knock Austria-Hungary out of the war. The initial attack occurred on top of Monte Grappa itself, with Italian units attacking as a diversion for the main attack to the southeast, which was to cross the Piave River. And as with most of the attacks on the mountain, the attack was launched under the cover of fog and with artillery support. To make the Austro-Hungarians believe that this was the main attack, many of the best units of the Italian military were stationed on Monte Grappa, including several units of the Arditi. The Austrians did believe the main thrust of the Italian offensive was going to come at Monte Grappa, and they reinforced the sector from 9 to 15 divisions. This did have consequences, as the Austrian defenses along the Piave River were reduced. They were still strong, but reduced to what they could have been. With massed artillery, the Italians attacked and were counterattacked by the Austrian forces, and both sides saw Monte Grappa as a critical sector, and this in part made the entire battle extremely costly and lethal. The artillery, as I said before, the rock splintering would amplify the effects of artillery. Eventually, the artillery did become less effective due to the rapid shifting of positions. 3 days later, to the southeast along the Piave River, the main Italian attack came. The Austrian defenses along the river were still formidable, as they had had time to repair the defensive line along the river since 1917, meaning that breaking through the river would be costly to the Italians, like it had been for the Austrians during their summer offensive. Along the Piave River, Arditi units, which were initially combat engineers, they set up pontoon bridgeheads across the Piave. Like in the summer, the pontoon bridges were destroyed by the river flooding again, and multiple Italian divisions became stranded on the other side. But this time, the Italian Air Force resupplied these divisions by air, and eventually new pontoon bridges were created. Despite the setbacks, the Italians managed to hold on to their positions, and on this day, the Austro-Hungarians contacted the Italians to initiate talks for an armistice. To the east of Monte Grappa along the Piave River, the next day, on the 20th, the Italian forces broke through along the river, and they outflanked the entire Austrian position on the river, while simultaneously Italians began to break out from their ridgeheads, and they captured the city of Vittorio Veneto, and they split the Austro-Hungarian army in half. And as multiple nations in Austria-Hungary began to declare their independence from the empire, the military broke down, and the non-Austrians in the military returned home to guarantee and fight for the independence of their homelands. On November 3rd, the Austrians surrendered to the Allied powers, and shortly thereafter, the Austro-Hungarian Empire ceased to exist. And so that is the conclusion of the history of the map Monte Grappa in Battlefield 1. But how does Battlefield 1 portray the battle in game? Well, in Battlefield 1, the Monte Grappa map is actually not on the mountain of Monte Grappa, nor is it really even in the same zip code. But it is in the same region, I guess. But it's in a completely different subsection of the Italian Alps. The actual location of Monte Grappa in Battlefield, and the map in Battlefield 1 is based off the location in the Valparola Pass, and the Valparola Pass is 45 miles or 73 kilometers to the north of the real Monte Grappa map. And in Battlefield 1, the map is oriented from southwest to northeast. This location and in-game map are remarkably similar in appearance, as the fort that is on the right side of Monte Grappa did actually exist, and the mountain and trenches at the bottom of the map also existed. However, the locations of the bunkers and the scale of the defenses are exaggerated in Battlefield 1 for gameplay reasons. For instance, on the Monte Grappa map, the fortress on the far right of the map is actually located closer to the entrance of the Valparola Pass, and it's not located on top of a hill overlooking the basically a tiny valley and a small body of water. I also could not determine if the church in Battlefield 1 ever existed in relation to the church on the left side of the map. However, in the modern day, buildings are in that basically that exact location in the same area, so I wouldn't count that out. I additionally couldn't verify the existence of the bunkers near the mountains, but there were definitely trenches built in the area. Historically, there was little to no combat in 1918 at the Valparola Pass, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed before any resistance could be formed that far north. Despite no combat taking place in 1918, from the Italian declaration of war in 1915 to the Battle of Caporetto in 1917, there was a very unconventional and brutal form of combat that took place at the Valparola Pass and the Dolomite Mountains as a whole. The Austro-Hungarian and Italian engineers fought through the use of digging tunnels, filling those tunnels with mines, and then detonating the explosives. The Dolomite front was akin to trench warfare on the Western Front, except in extreme conditions. This was thousands of feet above sea level, snowstorms, blizzards, and tons of mining by each side to give themselves the advantage. A map with tunnels dug into a mountain with winter snow and the possibility for clearing new sections of the map would be amazing. There would be verticality and close quarters fighting. If a map like this were actually created, I would probably spaz out with excitement. But there would just be so much potential for with a map like this. But anyways, I digress. Anyway, this is a history video about Monte Grappa, so I'll save this for as a topic for another video. However, I believe this could potentially be a very interesting map in Battlefield 1. For Monte Grappa proper, I would actually, it may have been interesting to see the real location in Battlefield 1, even if it was just limited to the tunnel fort under the summit of Monte Grappa and the entrances to set tunnels. it would have made for a very interesting close quarters map, which many in the Battlefield community have been vocal about wanting. I'm unsure of why DICE decided to to model the Monte Grappa map on a location that's 45 miles away. Perhaps it was for more balanced gameplay, or that the museum fort located at the Valproa Pass gave inspiration for DICE to create it. I do remember DICE does have a tendency to visit locations to accurately model terrain, from what I remember seeing in like dev diaries or dev blogs. And the Valproa Pass could have been the best place for them to do it. Perhaps they did look into the actual battle and didn't find the real location suitable for gameplay, but you know, only DICE will know. I'm not a game developer, so there's no way for me to say with any degree of certainty. Either way, the map in Battlefield 1 is fantastic. It's one of my favorites out of all the maps in the game. Anyways, I'm sure this video has gone on for long enough. This is just my ending conjecture, and I hope to sometime soon work on another history video and other battles in Battlefield 1, like maybe the I already did the Battle of the Cell, maybe the Kaiserslacht or anything like that. I know that was bad German, but yeah, have a good one and Happy New Year's.